right. So today's special guest is Mr. Chazz. My husband and I, Born, we are so excited to have you. Thank you so much for taking your time out to be here. It truly is an honor. He couldn't make it today. He's out with the kids, but welcome to the show. Please tell us a little bit more about yourself and your journey to conscious parenting.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here. I hope to really help some people out there in the world. I'll give the condensed version of kind of how I got to be where I am right now in my journey. So I started off as a Montessori teacher. I didn't really know what I was doing, and I struggled a lot in the beginning. I knew the kind of gravity of what I was doing of raising the next generation of humans, but I really didn't know how to do that. And I struggled in the beginning. I didn't know how to help them with their conflict. And so I really fell into what I was raised with and what the people around me were doing, which is a lot of threats and punishments, but it didn't feel good to me. And I didn't really, that's not the person I wanted to be. And that's not the teacher that I wanted to be. So I really said, like, there's got to be a different way. And I went out and looked for different information, podcasts, trainings, anything I could get my hands on to learn just healthier ways to guide children, more connection and collaborative based strategies rather than fear and control based strategies. Mm-hmm. All along that journey, made a lot of mistakes, messed up, regressed, all kinds of stuff. But I got better and better and better and better at practicing these connection and collaborative based strategies. Eventually became a lead teacher. People started to just kind of give me the kids that weren't able to be successful in other classrooms. They were able to be successful in my classrooms. Teachers started to ask me for advice. I started to give advice. They started to come back and say, wow, Mr. Chazz, you changed my whole day and the child's whole day. I need more. So then I became an educational specialist because I wanted to have a larger impact, greater than my community, little humans of 20 little humans from 3 to 5 years old. And I started to support teachers and children in different schools, where I was working with thousands of kids and hundreds of teachers. Did that for a while. Then the pandemic happened. Kids went home, teachers went home, and the parents became the 24/7 everything for children. And I noticed kind of how parents were really struggling during that time. And so I just started to create videos just offering, lessons that I had learned along the way. That might have taken me a long time to learn, but I was like, if I could just kind of condense into 1-minute video where you feel like your perspective is expanded by the end of it, or you have a new tool, then I could really help a lot of parents out there. I started to do that. It resonated with a lot of people. It grew on TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, and just really blew up because it just resonated with so many people. That turned into a podcast because as much as I love the short videos, because people don't have a lot of time, I wanted to dive deeper into the nuance. And 2, I wanted to introduce people to resources that could help you on your journey. Because on my journey, that was part of the challenge, like looking for this information that I thought was really good, that really resonated with me. And so in every episode, I try to introduce people to a different resource so that you can kind of, maybe they resonate with you. You can go follow them on social media, and they can be someone who supports you on your journey in the midst of you scrolling through social media, watching cat videos and prank videos or whatever you watch. And so that's kind of how I kind of got to where, what I'm doing right now. I also do a lot of speaking. Where I travel and I do speaking. I also do virtual speaking. And I just very much love sharing this information and kind of reaching back because this information wasn't as accessible when I was looking for it. There weren't really as many people on social media sharing about it. So that's a lot of it about me.
Wow, that's very impressive. Wow. I love that. I love that you even stepped into this new stage of life where you broadened your audience, and even where you said, I wanted to reach more and impact more kids and more people. So you started on social media as well. That's amazing.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, I know what it was like that feeling of like not knowing what to do and like feeling like you're messing up this kid or ruining this kid.
yeah,
And that's a really tough feeling to grapple with. And, so I love kind of reaching back and just sharing and helping people who are in that space or even a little bit farther on that journey, because there's so much to learn and to practice.
yeah. And I know for most parents, it could be really overwhelming because now we're in a space where there's so much information. Like there are a lot of parent coaches out there, and some information doesn't necessarily always align with each other. And so, knowing that, what would you say would be a good first step for someone who wants to start, but they really don't know where to start?
I would say a good first step is listening to a good podcast that is kind of reputable, or attending one of those like free conferences that they have.
Yeah.
And then, because usually at those conferences, those people are already kind of vetted, and there's lots of people that you can listen to, and really finding people that really resonate with you. And then if they have social media or a book, like go and find them, listen to them, and just start your journey there. And that's where I would say to start.
Okay. Yeah, that does make sense to kind of get a feel of what you're getting into by a free presentation or podcast, like you said, and then go from there. That makes sense. Yeah.
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 Yeah. There's a lot of information out there. And it's tough because it could not be, there is conflicting information out there. And if you find yourself conflicted, then, at that point, it's really important to kind of dig into yourself and figure out what your values are and what's important to you. And you're not meant to break. I think this is also important too, because like, as I talk about breaking generational cycles or kind of breaking these unhealthy patterns of behavior, what can happen sometimes is that, we're like, okay, like there's all these things that I need to unlearn and practice and do better. And we're on that journey. I'm like, okay, like, oh man, I didn't realize that like,
Yeah.
there's a better way to talk about food, and there's a better way to talk about emotions, and there's a better way to, to reduce judgment and shame. And it can be a lot of things. And it's like, oh man, there's so much to just like overcome. And we can sometimes feel overwhelmed because we feel like we have to break every cycle, right? And that is part of one of the things that we have to unlearn too. One of those like typical cycles is the cycle of perfectionism, feeling like it's not okay to make mistakes, feeling like we got to get everything right, when that's not reality, it's not realistic. And I always say, avoid being a perfectionist, be an improvementist. The goal isn't to be perfect every day. The goal is to improve a little every day. And so one of those things that like sometimes we're breaking these cycles and we're learning these things, and sometimes we get into this perfectionistic mindset. And that is something that we have to overcome too. Because if we try to pretend, or we're not able to really model the process of making mistakes and what those making mistakes looks like, and what genuine apologies look like, and how you repair relationships, we just try to pretend like we're perfect. In that, we are kind of perpetuating an unhealthy pattern of behavior of perfectionism. And that actually stops you from actually improving, because we'll shame ourselves and focus so much on like, I'm not, I'm messing up, I'm not, doing it right. And we focus on that instead of acknowledging like, I made a mistake. I did something outside of my value system. How do I bring myself back? How do I kind of repair the relationship? And really need to spend more energy kind of focusing on like, okay, it happened, dealing with our feelings about what happened, working through them in a healthy way, repairing the relationship, modeling those genuine apologies, and then moving forward, as opposed to just beating ourselves up and having all this negative self-talk of like, I'm so stupid, like I'm never going to be able to do this. So avoid being a perfectionist, being a provenist.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. That was actually one of the questions that I have for you today. It was about perfectionism in parenting, because I experienced this myself as well when I was transitioning into being more conscious. And well, let's get into that, because there's so many different words for this type of parenting. There's gentle parenting, there's parenting with understanding, there's conscious parenting. There's just like an overload of words, because I guess our community is also trying to find something to describe it. How would you describe a more healthy approach in parenting?
I think of all of like the parenting one, gentle, conscious, respectful, intentional, whatever, I think the one that resonates most with me, and I think also is most helpful in terms of the overall understanding what the overall journey is the conscious word, and just really increasing our awareness. I think for me, but I think more specific in terms of the actions that you're doing, of what you're kind of replacing the old paradigms with, is connection and collaboration based. Like what we're doing is based off of connection and collaboration, as opposed to traditionally what we've done is based parenting and guiding children off fear and control.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. I love that, because there's just so much, it's just an overload. And I think it kind of confuses parents as well. It's like, okay, well, what exactly is this? And I think it has a lot to do with being conscious. And yeah, like you said.
But I also say, sorry to cut you off, but I also say that, you don't really need a label for what you're doing, right? You don't have to label it. Like we try to label things, like labels can sometimes labels put things in a box when they don't need to be in a box. And, labels can be helpful because it can help people kind of understand. Like if I say, I just met you and I say, I practice conscious parenting and you do it too, then it's like, oh, like we can connect. Like there's that immediate connection. And it's a quick, easy, almost shortcut way to describe what you're trying to do. But at the end of the day, it's a shortcut. And I don't think that any one word can fully encompass, what we're trying to do here. But I think the closest things are conscious, connection, and collaboration.
Yeah, those words do describe it very well. And I think that's a nice point that you took up there, where you said, labeling, because I think that's what we do with people all the time. We label them, or with kids, and then it just has that label, and then there's just a lack of empathy behind labeling something. So I think that's we're just, I guess the parenting community, which is so transformational at this point, is trying to find the words to describe it and help people better understand it. But I feel like we're not there yet. We haven't found that one word, because it's so difficult to manage. But yeah, there are a lot of misunderstandings as far as gentle parenting is concerned as well. What would you say? What would you tell those parents who, there's so many videos about gentle parenting is this, and they really joke about it a lot. But what would you say? What would you advise parents who are practicing gentle parenting to stay on their journey?
Well, I mean, remember why you started the journey in the first place, right? For different people, it might be, different reasons. Some people might be like, it was the way that I was raised. I know, like, a lot of people start their journey off like, I know I don't want to do that. Like, I know I don't want to do things the way that I was raised, right? But that's not enough, because, and I mean, it's a good start, and that's where a lot of people start. But if you just start like, I'm going to do the opposite of what my parents did, like that is not necessarily going to be helpful, because, maybe your parents might have been, very aggressive or abusive, you might go over into being permissive, which is absolutely not what gentle, conscious, respectful parenting is. So you do have to learn exactly kind of, you got to learn what to do instead. It's not enough to say, what I don't want to do this. You have to figure out what to do instead. And that's going to be difficult because you've likely not had a lot of examples seeing the connection and collaborative based strategies. You have a lot of examples of being control based strategies. So in those moments when your child talks back to you, or they say no, or they're doing something unsafe, or they are picking on their little brother, or being a little too rough accidentally, it can be hard to know what to do because you haven't had a lot of examples of that. And that's where like learning from other people and communities and practicing and making mistakes just comes in. But recognizing that is going to be difficult, that is going to be hard. And there's a lot to unlearn. So look, I think about it. I don't know where my phone is, but this is a podcast, so people are listening anyways. I think about this as like iPhones, and if you were on this journey, a lot of it is really based, and not to say that people were practicing connection and collaborative based practices before the neuroscience, because people were, especially a lot of indigenous people were practicing connection and collaborative based practices. But we now have a lot of science, a lot of neuroscience in particular, to back up those practices, because we have more of an understanding of what's happening internally and more understanding of behavior and all of that stuff. So a lot of what we're doing, a lot of the gentle conscious parenting stuff is based off of a lot of the neuroscience that we've gotten. It's like new technology, right? And so like, if you're on this journey, you're kind of like, especially if no one in your family has really been on this journey, you're like the first iPhone. So the very first thing, clap it up, pat yourself on the back, kiss your brain that you are on this journey. Like, let's take a moment just to celebrate that. Clap it up.
Sure. Yeah.
First iPhone. It's a big deal, right? It's a huge deal. But it's not without its faults, right? Because I think we could all say now, in retrospect, the first iPhone was great at the time, and everyone ran and raved at the time, but it had some kinks to work out, right? And so you're like the first iPhone, and all along the journey, you're going to be having these software updates where you're going to be improving. You're going to be improving. And now, from update to update, it may not feel like you've had like a huge moment of growth. You may not see from update to update. You might, after you've improved a little bit, you might be like, it feels like nothing's even changed. But over time, after 50, 60, 100 updates, you're like, wow, this is almost unrecognizable. There's so many things that have changed from when I first was embarked on this journey, from when I first got the iPhone, right? And that's the process, right? You're not meant to be a perfect iPhone. You're just meant to take every step that you can to have those little updates. Now, and then what will happen is that your children are going to be like the iPhone 2, and they're going to build off of all those updates, and they're going to build off of that, and they're going to be probably better, farther along their journey than what you were, right? When you started, when you were the first iPhone, and they're going to have updates too. I mean, they're not going to be perfect too. And so it's also kind of going back to what I was saying about showing them how to make mistakes. You're kind of in your updates and in your improvements, you're kind of showing them the blueprint of how to improve, how to do updates, right? And they improve, and they're not going to be perfect either. But their kids are going to build off of what they did, and so on and so on. So, one day you have the iPhone 22 or Google Glass or whatever the technology of the future is. But you're not meant to be the Google Glass. You're just meant to improve as much as you can on your journey. and allow your children to build off of that and improve. And that's the process, right? You're not meant to be perfect.
Yeah.
Just improve, little by little by little by little.
Yeah. Wow, I love that analogy. That's amazing. I think that's a really good motivational speech to just show up as you are with all your imperfections, because this idea of perfection, it doesn't exist. There is no perfect parent, no matter how gentle or how positive you are. There just is no perfect parent. And there's no perfect iPhone. That was a perfect analogy. So yeah, I love that. I love that. Showing up as you are with the tools you have today, and that is enough, with the capacity you have, and tomorrow's a new day. And most definitely. I love that you're empowering parents to just be themselves, be authentic.
Yeah. It's so important.
And I think, it makes it hard for us because we are developed, and our nervous systems are developed, and then we have our children who we are trying to guide. But I guess we're both, if you look at parent and child, a parent who hasn't yet learned that it is safe to make mistakes, that it's safe to show up as you are, and a child who is looking to find out what it feels like to feel safe while I make mistakes. I guess you're both at the same learning state. You're both at the starting line, and I guess you can embark on that journey together, if you will, right? And
you really, really powerful to look at it as you're both all learning journeys together simultaneously, and you're both just learning alongside each other, right? And the beautiful thing about kids is they will give you a lot to learn. They'll give you lots of opportunities for learning and reflection and growth. And, those moments of conflict when things, are tough, like those moments of conflict, it can be really hard to see them as a gift, but they really are. They really are like just opportunities for learning. And if we can look at it like that, we can really maximize the learning potential from each of these moments, and maybe even appreciate and be grateful, and maybe not in the moment, but maybe in reflection, and maybe like at night when things have calmed down, maybe we can even be grateful and appreciate some of those tough moments, because it really does push us to grow, they will point out the bugs in our software, and then we realize, we might need an update to fix that, or update to improve that a little bit. And, it might be something where they tell you that you're yelling at them, and they want you to stop yelling, or you might even see a little bit of yourself in them and how they handle situations. You're like, oh man, that sounds like me. Maybe, I wasn't as conscious or aware of what it sounded like when I was saying it, but hearing my 4-year-old say it is powerful, and it's kind of put a mirror up to my own behavior. And I think that can be those really powerful things that kids can do for us as they challenge us.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. I think I completely agree. I think that we can learn as much from children as they can learn from us. Parenting really is just a learning journey. It's a learning experience. When I first became a mom, I thought I had to show up with all the answers and all the solutions all ready to go, but it really is just being open to finding your way together. Yeah, that's so beautiful. So let me see. I wanted to talk a little bit more about, you said something about learning, and that sparked the next question, which was about discipline. There is, sadly so much confusion about discipline and parenting, and a large community of parents who still believe that discipline needs to include punishment in some way, shape, or form for it to be effective. What would you say to that, or to those parents, to that community of parents? What advice would you have?
Ooh, so much here. First thing is that the discipline is really teaching. And you don't have to feel bad to learn something. And actually, a lot of times it really, shame and beating ourselves up and a lot of times gets in the way of the actual learning. And this happens so much, right? Like a child will do something and then we're trying to talk to them about something and they're just the focus is on the punishment and like, oh, I don't want to be punished. I don't want to be the thing, taken away from me. And that becomes the focus rather than actually figuring out what happened and solving the problem. And it really creates more defensiveness in children, which closes them off from actually learning something new and problem solving, different ways to solve problems and work through their emotions. And it puts all the focus on the punishment, and a lot of times them just trying to get out of the punishment or being upset by the punishment, and it's a huge distraction a lot of the times. And there is, and not to say that there aren't consequences, and consequences are honestly a whole conversation to have. But before I even like having the conversation about consequences and how to practice the skill of consequences, there are so many other things that we need, so many other skills that we need to learn and practice to support children and to teach children and to help children, that consequences are really a last resort. And when I say consequences, there's a difference between consequences and punishments. And I will I'll break down right now kind of the difference in that. But before I even go into it, again, because whenever I talk about consequences, because we're so conditioned with consequences, and I always say that consequences are like the hardest skill to actually practice, because we have a tendency to power trip with consequences. And, the way that our parents use them they use punishment in a logical context. So whenever we get even into this realm of consequences, like we're just thinking about punishment. So I think this can be one of the hardest skills to use. And before I go into it, I also want to kind of make clear is that what I'm talking about here and a lot of what I practice comes from a program called Conscious Discipline, which is a social emotional learning program based off all this brain science stuff that is constantly improving and learning itself. And there are kind of 7 skills in conscious discipline. And the skills are assertiveness, composure, empathy, choices, encouragement, positive intent, and consequences. Mm-hmm. So all those other things are things that we need to focus on and practice and try to master before we even really get into the realm of consequences, and really practicing consequences. So 3 kinds of consequences: natural consequences. And these are the consequences that happen without our intervention. These are consequences. So for example, the child is running around inside, and they run into something and they hurt themselves. That is a natural consequence, right? You may have told them, use the walking feet inside, or if you're going to run in the playroom, and they're running in the living room, and they run and they, hurt themselves. That's a natural consequence. And natural consequences are the best for learning purposes. They motivate people to learn new skills. Natural consequences motivate children to learn new skills. However, if their child is running around inside and you push a chair in front of the child and they fall over the chair, that is not a natural consequence. That's just you being a jerk. Like, it's not because you are imposing, like, you're intervening. That's just not being such as being unkind and harmful. It's not natural consequence. Will I say a way to kind of maximize the benefit of natural consequences is not to say when they fall, to say, I told you so. See, that's why you shouldn't be running around and just kind of rub it in their face that they got hurt and that they weren't listening. And, that's not the way, but to really offer empathy and to really be there with them. Because when you do the I told you so kind of thing, you reinforce the dynamic of it's me versus you, as opposed to me and you versus the problem. Mm-hmm. And that's what we need to do to really help children to learn. We have to create the sense of it's me and you versus the problem, right? We have to kind of create that sense, that feeling. They have to feel that. And to do that, what we want to do is use that skill of empathy and to really be there for them in that moment when they're, even though we've told them a bunch of times, we may want to say, I told you so, but instead of doing that, really comfort them and be there for them and let them know, hey, I'm on your team. Like that hurt. Like I'm here for you. Right. And then you can kind of reflect on what happened. Right. And okay, let's talk about what happened. Like you were playing, like what, I was playing cops and robbers. And then, okay. And you were running around and then what happened? And then I, fell and I tripped. Okay. So what can we do? What do you think we can do differently next time? Right. That is, and you even see there, connection, collaboration, right? And that creates more of a sense, it's me and you versus the problem. The problem is we got to figure out how you can play and have fun without getting hurt, right? So what can we do next time? Natural consequences. Now there are logical consequences. And this is where I think it gets tough because we're getting a little closer to the punishments. There's a fine line there. Logical consequences, it's the 3 R's. They are respectful, they are related, and they are reasonable, right? So let's break those 3 things down. Respectful. So it's not we're not yelling at them, we're not being aggressive, we're not you need to go in the corner and think about what you did because, we're not. That's not respectful. You wouldn't want someone talking to you that way. If you wouldn't want your boss talking to you that way, then, you really shouldn't be talking to, it's not helpful for you to talk to a child that way, right? And a lot of times, there's a whole nother conversation talking about power, but humans have a hard time with power in general. And where we as adults, a lot of times, unreasonably exercise our power is with children because they really can't defend themselves and they really have no choice but to be with us. They don't really have a choice. So we, whether consciously or unconsciously, sometimes, a lot of times unreasonably exercise our power over children. And sometimes that comes out in our tone. And sometimes it comes out in these other 3 things too. It's also respectful isn't, oh, honey, will you pretty please put the ball away and not throw it in the way? Because you got to be confident too. Respectful is all part of being respectful is being confident in the boundary you're saying and what you're saying and not being wishy-washy or will you put it away, please? Right? That kind of question mark in that tone of it's kind of like the high voice at the end, like that's not confident. And so part of the respectful part is also confident tone, right? Reasonable. So they're not cleaning up. Reasonable is, so what's unreasonable is maybe they're not cleaning up and you're like, you're never going to play with these toys again. You're never going to play with it again. That's unreasonable. Yeah. It's unreasonable. And it's the whole never again. And you might need to just sometimes get a little bit more regulated, get your composure, because a lot of times we tend to do these illogical punishments when we're not composed, when we're not regulated. And so it's kind of our way of taking out our upset out on the child. And so that's unreasonable. Again, that's not a logical consequence. The other part is related. That's got to be related to the thing that you're actually doing. That's actually the problem. So for example, if the ball is They're playing with the ball in the living room. You tell them to play within the playroom or in a certain area for them to play with the ball. Like, this is the way you play with the ball. And they keep bringing it out to the living room, play in the living room. Maybe you don't want them to play in the living room because there's fragile stuff there, for whatever the reason is, but they're not doing it. They keep on bringing it out to the living room. Logical consequence would, or illogical consequence would be saying like, okay, you need to go to timeout and think about what you did, go to the corner, isolate it, and think about what has nothing to do with the ball, right? Again, it's just us using our power, us exerting power over children. And it's just, it has nothing to do with what's actually happening. Yeah. What would be related would be, you're having a hard time keeping the ball in the playroom. So we're going to put it away for now, and we're going to try again later. And that try again later is important because you want them to practice again. You want them to practice complying with the boundary, right? Cooperating with the boundary. You want them to practice that. And, you just take it away for a week and then they get a hold of the ball again a week, 2 weeks later, they've had no real opportunity to practice and probably going to be the same problem again, right? Where you practice later in that day or the next day, then they have an opportunity, that lesson's so fresh in their mind, they have an opportunity to practice again. And again, consequences are the last thing. So I would recommend a lot of other things to do before even doing the consequences, like having a visual, right? Having a visual of where they need to keep the ball, maybe putting a piece of tape on the ground so they can see exactly where that line is, and then practice with the ball. Like, oh, the ball's getting out. Let's bring it back in and keep on playing, and kind of practicing that with them before we even get to the consequences, right? The logical consequence. So I said natural consequences motivate children to learn skills, new skills. Now, logical consequences motivate children to practice skills that they already have. Okay. So using logical consequences will not be helpful if a child does not have that skill. Yeah. And a lot of times we're not very good at assessing whether or not a child does have a skill in that moment. Because sometimes they might have a skill, but maybe in that moment they don't have a skill because they're hungry, or they're tired, or they are overstimulated. There could be a million reasons why they're not exhibiting that skill at that time, right? You as a parent, sometimes you have the skill to self-regulate and solve the problem and, get them from point A to point B, get them dressed and out the door without yelling, and, everything goes well. Sometimes you have the skill to be able to do that. And sometimes you might not. And sometimes you end up yelling or going to aggression or doing things that are outside of your value system. Just knowing that, like, we fall into that too. Sometimes just because we've been able to show a skill once or even a couple of times doesn't mean that we always can show that skill 100% of the time in, perpetuity. So, so again, this is one of the hardest skills to use because sometimes it's hard for us to assess that. Sometimes like, well, I've seen you do it before. But that doesn't mean that they can do it right now in this moment. And sometimes children just need support. Sometimes they just need connection. And so consequences aren't always appropriate to use. Logical consequences aren't always appropriate to use. And now we have illogical consequences or punishments, which are not related, which are kind of really the opposite. They're unreasonable. Any one of those R's starts putting into illogical consequences, right? If it's unreasonable or unrelated or not respectful, then it's not a logical consequence. And what punishments do, what illogical consequences do, is you're just punishing a child for not having the skill that they need to be successful in that moment. Yeah. So it's not productive at all. Yeah. The natural consequences are most productive in most situations. The illogical or the logical consequences can be productive in certain situations after really practicing all those other skills first. and illogical consequences are not productive. So in terms of discipline, I say discipline is not even so much of the consequences. I'd say the discipline is more of the example I give of putting the tape on the ground and teaching them and role playing and showing them to how to keep the ball in the playroom. Discipline would be practicing, if a child took their ball and they hit to because someone took their ball or because they want a ball. Discipline would be teaching them how to communicate, how to ask for a turn. Discipline would be if someone crosses their boundary, teaching them how to say, I don't like it when you touch me, please give me space, or please keep your hands to yourself. Discipline would be giving them two positive choices and practicing choosing from those two positive choices, right? This is discipline, right? And that is where the teaching is. The consequences are really more of a last resort.
Yeah. Wow, I love that. Thank you for taking that step by step through, because I think that's really important to differentiate. And I always find that, before we can offer any alternatives or teach, we need to understand what is going on. Like, what need is my child trying to meet? If a child hits, sometimes that communicates, hey, I just wanted to play with you and I had no other way to communicate that. And boom, 2-year-old hits, right?
And the discipline moment there is, how do you communicate when they want they want your connection? What is the way that they can communicate that, right? We don't want them, let's say, climbing on the glass table to get our attention. So what's a better way that we can teach them to get our connection, right? It could be maybe squeezing your hand or saying play or asking for a hug or, conscious discipline. There's a book that Dr. Becky Bailey wrote called I Love You Rituals. And this is for a little bit older age, probably like 3. But there's
for a minute there, after you said asking for a hug, you were gone. I think your connection was
oops, sorry. So it could be teaching them to ask for a hug. It could be asking for connection in a different way. There's this book that this is for a little bit older age group, probably for maybe 3 to 8 years old. This is a book that Dr. Becky Bailey wrote called I Love You Rituals, and it's full of little, almost kind of like modernized nursery rhymes. They're not like the nursery rhymes with all the bad messages in them. They're been adapted to have healthier messages, but they are little moments of connection that you can create with your child, and you can practice with your child. And so then when they want connection, they can ask for can we do Peter Peter Pumpkin Eater or Twinkle Twinkle Little Star? And these little motions, it's a song with some motions and some moments of connections that they can ask for when they want a little bit of connection. That is discipline, teaching them what to do instead of trying to punish them for doing what you didn't want them to do.
Yeah, exactly. Wow, that's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. I think it's like you said, it's just important to know what are they trying to communicate? What need are they trying to meet? And once you figure that out, then you can help them, then you can teach them, because, it might not be effective to just be like, okay, you have option A or B, and you didn't even understand what the need was or what they were trying to help themselves get met. Right. Yeah. All right. I think there was one more question that I think would be really interesting. You have experience in schools as a teacher, and you're a teacher coach and a parent coach. And so, what I hear teachers say a lot of the time is, we have all we have a teaching plan, and we have to get that down pat. The kids have to learn this and that, and we really have no time to consider their emotions and their feelings. What would you say? Well, what advice would you give teachers when they're trying to navigate this parenting approach with kids? How can they take time for a child's feelings and emotions and be considerate of that? And at the same time, navigate the pressures of having to get this plan, that the kids learn what they're supposed to learn? What would you say? What advice would you give them?
Well, whether or not you choose to consider the children's feelings, that their feelings are going to be there. And I'm sure that you know just as well as I do that their feelings, their emotions impact your lesson. They impact your plan, right? And so when things don't go according to plan, it's because they don't know how to handle their emotions, or their emotions are coming into play. So whether or not you want to consider or address their feelings, they're going to be impacting your lesson regardless. So you have a choice. You have a choice to try to just ignore it and try to barrel through, or you have a choice to help them work through their feelings and address this thing that is going to impact your lessons, your classroom, whether you like it or not. And you realistically, your own emotions are going to impact the way that you do your lessons too. So we're all humans in this classroom with emotions, kind of going back and forth. And if we don't acknowledge it and deal with it and handle it, then they're going to have an even greater negative impact, and they're going to have a really negative impact in your classroom, as opposed to they could have a really positive impact in your classroom, right? At the other end of feelings are solutions, right? Feelings are like the bridge to solutions, right? There's a problem, then there's feelings that happen, and then at the end of those feelings can be a solution, right? A way to kind of solve those problems. And it's not just parenting that considers children feel. Like there are programs out there like conscious discipline that I mentioned before. I would really recommend looking into conscious discipline, getting very familiar with conscious discipline, because there's a lot of resources for schools that are adapted with schools. So you probably have kids crossing boundaries with each other, and that probably gets in the way of your lesson. He's touching me, they did this, they did that, whatever. And then you're getting there and trying to solve the problem, and sometimes it probably escalates, might even turn into a fight. It'd be really helpful if they had the skill of assertiveness, that they were able, had a way when someone did something, they knew how to solve the problem themselves so that you didn't have to, right? And now the other, I think, I'd say a benefit that schools have in terms of teaching this stuff is that when you teach about, emotions and how to solve problems and how to work through emotions when you teach that, some children will get it quicker than other children, but you will have a bunch of children who will support you in teaching this to each other, right? Into teaching these skills with each other. And especially in the beginning of the year, if you focus on this, if you focus on conscious discipline, and the book that I would recommend to get if you're a teacher, you're interested in conscious discipline, would be Conscious Discipline: Building Resilient Classrooms, by Dr. Becky Bailey, and get real familiar with that book. And if you're a parent, I would look into Easy to Love, Difficult to Discipline by Dr. Becky Bailey. Those are two great resources. And for specifically the skill of assertiveness and teaching children boundaries, I would recommend a book called Schubert's Big Voice. Those are what I would kind of recommend kind of starting on this journey. And so to answer the question in short is that it's going to impact the emotions. We're going to impact your lesson one way or another. It's better that you can be proactive about solving these problems, working through these problems and teaching children to solve these problems, rather than pretending like they don't exist and suffering throughout the whole year because the children don't know how to handle it. And so they're just acting out their emotions and causing more problems. And you don't know how to handle it. You don't know what to do with it either, because your teacher training probably didn't teach you how to handle this. in a healthy and effective way.
Yeah. Yeah. Hopefully one day soon it will be all integrated into teacher training, that this is just a normal part of society, that teachers know how to navigate their own feelings and emotions and also teach it to children. I think, we think that school is like this space where you are supposed to be social and learn how to be social, but it really does prevent you from being social in certain instances, because you're supposed to conform and comply and sit in your seat and learn all these things. But
and they don't teach you healthy ways to be social with each other, right? And this is a place where they just cram all these kids in here and like, oh yeah, they need to, a lot of people's like, yeah, they need to socialize and be with each other, but it's just kind of like, oh, they'll figure it out. But clearly they're not figuring it out in a healthy way. And a lot of what they're learning are unhealthy patterns of behavior from, guess who? Us adults, right? And we don't know how to teach them what to do better, because it's how we grew up and what we learned too. And our parents didn't know any better, and we just bring it all in and cram them all in. And then we like, oh, well, let's try to teach you science and math. But, I'm upset that they're only worried about the social aspect, or maybe something happens socially to them, so they can't focus on the science and the math. But, rather than it just being teacher training for teachers to learn, like, I think this would be really important for curriculum, as important as science and math and in English. I'd actually say it's more important, because you can be the smartest, and we're talking about to be successful and to get a job and all that stuff. Like, if we're talking about that, like, a lot of times we have to work in teams, right? We have to work together. And it doesn't matter if you're the smartest person in the room, you're really good at, math or science or whatever, you could be a genius. It doesn't matter if you're a jerk and no one wants to work with you, right? And you will bring the team down if you don't have these social skills, if you don't know how to communicate in a healthy way when you feel like someone is crossing a boundary, right? And you're going to bring yourself down too. And, you may, in these situations, maybe someone, you feel like someone crossed the boundary, you might go to either being passive, holding all in, doesn't solve the problem. And so maybe one day you blow up, and then they're like, okay, wow, like that, you didn't handle that appropriately, you're fired. Or maybe you just go right to aggression. And because that's maybe just what you learned and what you saw. And then again, people like, hey, like, you're not handling this the right way. And people are shut off to your message, and even outside of the workplace, we were talking about our partnerships, right? Communicating with our partners. We have a tendency to be passive or aggressive or passive aggressive. And this doesn't make for a healthy relationship either, right? Which impacts this general happiness as humans, as a human being. Even if you're rich, you have all the money in the world, without, healthy relationships, you can still be really sad and depressed. And there are a lot of people with a lot of money that are that way, because they, maybe for a lot of reasons, maybe they didn't value their relationships because they were so focused on getting the money, or they didn't know how to, they pushed everyone away because they didn't know healthy ways to navigate relationships. And they may have all the money, but also less happy than the person who maybe doesn't have as much financial resources, but has a healthy relationship with their friends and family.
Yeah. So true. So true. Yeah. And I also always mention to parents, when they try and better the relationship to their children or to their partners, that it starts with the relationship that we have with ourselves.
Yes.
That's the core of everything, how we treat ourselves. Yeah.
That is, and I say, like, it's almost, you have to learn really how to care for yourself. If you don't feel cared for, it's going to be really hard to care for someone else, right? And it's not just self-care, it's also about community care too. It's also about trying to surround yourself around people who will also care for you too, of being able to have that support, right? That supportive partner or supportive friends. And so, like, yes, while self-care is important, I also think community care is important too. And part of that, again, is having those healthy relationships and establishing and finding and maintaining those healthy relationships so that you do have enough resources in your body to care for another person, right? Because like if you're in survival mode, you don't feel cared for, it's going to be really hard to have empathy for another person.
Most definitely. Yeah. That is so true. That is so true. So, yeah, I think we made it through all the questions that I had for you today. Is there anything else that you would like to say? Closing off, I know that you have some wonderful resources for parents. For example, the visual schedule that you have for kids. You want to tell us a little bit more about that?
Oh man, yes, visual schedule actually have, and it is, I'm actually updating it right now to improve it, to make it even better. But it's one of those things, you have a hard time transitioning with your child, getting from point A to point B, a visual schedule can be very helpful. I've done a whole podcast episode about it. I have a podcast called Mr. Chazz's Leadership, Parenting, and Teaching Podcast. And so the visual schedule is something you can get. I'm going to be coming out with an online course later this year. Where I'm going to dive deeper into all the things that I talked about today, giving more practical examples. So I really be on the lookout for that. And then after that, a book will come out. So be on the lookout for that for me in the future. Follow me on social media, Mr. Chazz. And hopefully I can just be a support for you on your journey.
Yeah, I love that. Wow. I'm definitely going to link all the information that you've mentioned in the show notes and in the description on YouTube as well. So we can kind of get that out there so that they have the information and the resources that they need.
All right.
So to end this episode, it was really a great chat. I really enjoyed it. I have 5 questions that we always ask our guests. You can just briefly answer them in one sentence or one word.
Let's see if I can.
Let's see. And if you go above it, it's fine. So first question is, what is the worst advice that you have ever received?
Get more aggressive with the kids.
Okay. All right. So what's the best advice you ever received?
Trying to think exactly this was probably like the first best advice. And this is completely off topic, but I remember as a Montessori teacher, I was really struggling with, I had to do like an art show for the kids. I was really struggling because like the art wasn't, it was kid art, and it wasn't like, I guess in my head, I wanted it to be product art as opposed to the process art that it was. And, I remember sitting in the dramatic play area, and like the person who like oversaw the whole Montessori thing, her name was Lori Morano, who oversaw the whole Montessori for our company. Kind of, we're sitting in these little chairs, and she just kind of put her hand on my hand and pretty much told me to just kind of let go of those expectations and just kind of what will be, will be. And I had to it really just was like one of the first pieces of like really good advice that I got that like really just kind of just started to change everything. So really just to condense the answer is what will be, and to just kind of accept it. And I think that has helped in so many other areas that have nothing to do with art, but to really practicing that power of acceptance.
Yeah. Wow. That's beautiful. So number 3, name one thing that you used to value that you don't value anymore.
Being able to control children and flaunting my control over children to other adults would be what I used to value. I think it's still something that I have to remind myself to let go.
Mhm.
But yeah, flaunting my control over children.
Okay. Wow. Number 4, children are an enrichment to this world. And if you could name one thing that we can learn from children and should integrate every day in our lives, what would it be?
Being present. Us adults have a tendency to live so much in the past and in the future, and children are so present. They were walking to the car, they see a bug, and the whole world is about that bug. Like, and I think that is something huge. They can learn a little bit more about how to plan and how to maybe learn from the past from us, but we can learn so much about being present from children.
Yeah. Wow, that's beautiful. Most definitely. Okay, so number 5, and the last question is, if you could pick one rule that the whole world had to follow, what would it be?
I have to follow. Ooh, I'm almost trying to like, when dealing with children, truly get into the perspective of children.
Mhm.
It's one thing to know where they're at. It's another thing to see the world from their eyes.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel that. That's amazing. Yeah. Okay, and that's the last question that I have. I want to say thank you so much again for your time and all your insight. The gems that you have dropped in this episode are amazing. And yeah, I can't wait for this episode to drop. I think it's going to be, true inspiration for many parents that will listen. Yeah.
Great, great. Yeah, I think so too. It would be really helpful, and really be on the lookout for that online course, because I'm already going really deep into it. And especially if you're curious about the consequences, the whole part about consequences, to learn how to do it and what to do before the consequences. So you don't even have to go to consequences as often. It's going to be really, really good. It's been life-changing for me, not just working with children, but just for me as an adult navigating relationships. And I know it'll be life-changing for you too. So check it out when it comes out.
Yeah. Is that going to be this year or next year?
This year.
Wow. Yeah, I can't wait for that. I'm definitely going to be looking into that when it drops.
Oh, please do.
Okay, thank you so much. That was the end, and I'm sure we'll be in touch. As soon as your course comes out, let me know. Write me on Instagram. I will definitely check it out, and I'll let my community know as well.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you too.